All right, all right. Hello, hello. Welcome, Simo. Welcome, everyone else. This is a special hangout on air with Simo Leone of a company known as Quadrilateral to us, which we will call Quadrilateral for now. And he's an experienced engineer who's been with that company on the software side, doing infinity different things that he'll talk about. But in the reason for bringing him here today is to because he has so much experience with a company that's grown from I don't know how many employees were there when you were there, like 20.
More like 100.
Okay, 100. It's grown from 100 to many multiples of that, and he's seen a lot of hiring, and that's obviously something that's very relevant to you guys as students and anyone else who's looking in. So we just want to bask in your wisdom and learn a little bit more about, particularly how the technical interview process works. But so I know you're kind of acquainted with what we do here, but for everyone who's not, this is an intensive online software engineering school, and we run a series of programs. But this one is the core is a 16-week full-time web development program that makes people hireable. So this is a pretty relevant conversation. So Simo, I'd love to hear from you. Just kind of maybe the basics of sort of who are you and what do you do.
Sure, yeah. Where do I start? I guess to start from the very beginning. I'm a computer nerd that started off hanging out in high school with lots of late nights exploring things. Um, Became a developer on Arch Linux at that time, contributed for several years, um, and decided to go to college. Obviously, good choice. Went and studied computer science at the University of Illinois down in Champaign-Urbana, great town. Um, Actually ended up graduating in 3 years. Got a job at a startup out in San Francisco, California, where I'm at now. And that startup was Rapleaf. Worked there for a couple years. Um, did a lot of content personalization, which is another way of saying data for advertising, as it turns out. And For the past about 4.5 years, I've worked at Square. This is where I have to drop the disclaimer. I in no way represent Square in this conversation. I represent myself. My employer happens to just be them at this time. With that said, what I do here is I work on what's known as a tiger team, which means I get dropped on tasks for 2, 3 months at a time, whatever they may be. Sometimes it's project management. Sometimes it's a project that just needs an extra person, whatever they need. It's been pretty cool.
Cool. Um, so I guess one thing that I'm kind of interested in is in the hiring process. Like how does the hiring process around you come together, and sort of what is generally your role in it?
Yeah, my current job, I've actually been pretty involved in the hiring process. I've interviewed something like 500 people personally over several years, and that's just ridiculous throughput.
Yes.
So, um, so that's my role. I mostly get things scheduled on my calendar, and then I go interview people. It's the usual workflow. But that said, when you do that many of them, you do get a pretty good idea for what interview processes look like, what people's expectations are, and obviously I have my personal experiences from both my previous company and I've interviewed lots of places as well. I have a pretty good idea what tech interviews look like, what the different flavors of them are, and so on and so forth. Um, Different companies will do different things. They generally follow kind of the same pattern, which I think we'll get into a bit later. Yeah.
Yeah, but I am curious kind of how that process generally works. I mean, are you typically giving technical screens to software engineering candidates, or do you cover more functions and more phases of the interview funnel, or what do you see of that process?
Yeah, so the part I see is really just the actual interviewing itself. So I do mostly phone screens and on-site interviews. Yeah.
Got it.
The other parts of that process are obviously once you get an offer and negotiation and selling, is a big part of it as well, sourcing. So
Yeah.
those are other people's job functions.
You get the fun stuff, huh? Um,
Yep.
well, so I mean, from your perspective, then, what are you looking for? I mean, like, why do you hire people, and sort of from your perspective as a hiring as someone who is hiring and who is that involved in the process, like, what do you want? Why
Yeah.
are you
So
doing it?
really, what everybody's looking for is, for one, people they want to work with, right? Um, and I would say a lot of times enthusiasm goes quite a long way. So, when I was interviewing places myself, which I haven't quite frankly done in a long time, but when I was, one of the things I would actually do is go to the websites of whatever company I was interviewing at the next day or in an hour. It doesn't really take that much prep, um, and just read it. Look for things like mission statements, things like that. Because one of the things that interviewers are going to look for, whether they're conscious of it or not, is just to see if you sound like them, which sounds a little weird to say, but it's true. So, an interviewer is going to like hearing words out of their mission statement, for example, because, if they're working at especially a startup, they probably believe in that mission. Um, and I know it works on me. People that ask about things that are specific to the company, I definitely perk up and start chatting about the company a lot more, and just all of a sudden become a lot friendlier. It totally works. So consciously or not, everybody's looking for that. More objectively, obviously, people are supposed to be looking for things like just technical chops. So, do you know whatever subject matter you have in depth? So, when you're being asked about your experience, can you go deep? If you say you worked on something, they're going to keep digging until they find out what you don't know about it. Um, it can be a bit of a trap some places. Some people are out to prove that they know more than you during interviews. That's very common, actually, in the tech industry, unfortunately. When you encounter those people, you just have to just roll with it, realize that's what's happening, and just kind of write that one off. But in any case, that's what people should be doing. They want to see that you have deep knowledge and deep interest of something, company and both technology. Especially for people coming from like a boot camp background or for new college grads or something like that. You don't have that much work to show for what you say your skills are. It's a lot easier for somebody who's had 10 years worth of jobs to talk about, oh, I designed this system for metrics at my old company, and whatever, 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 and go deep on it. But coming straight out of school, you're like, yeah, I did this class project last semester, and yeah, it's not great. So my recommendation would be to talk about any internships you've had, anything that even resembles real world experience. So if you wrote a patch for an open source project or anything like that, that's actually worth talking more about than your school project, because it's something that shows that you were interested in it, that you took the initiative to go do something. You probably had to figure out something that you didn't know about up front, went for it. So, um, yeah,
Oh, so as a I mean, I guess there's a lot of ways that we could go with this, but I mean, one thing you did bring up is sort of like kind of how do people sell themselves, and I guess before maybe we get to the specific recommendations for the candidates, I am pretty interested, again, maybe to explore a little bit deeper kind of your thought process as like kind of the signals that you're looking for, because like I imagine that you probably have a series of things that you sort of need to check off in your head, whether they're binary or whether they're some sort of like 0 to 10 scale, that represent like a good candidate. And what are those criteria, and how do they get defined?
yeah. So I would say relatively few companies have like an objective rubric. Um, a lot of this stuff is just spidey sense stuff. So that's something just to realize when going into it. A lot of it is just, what I'm about to say is probably individual to me. It's not like somebody hands you a thing. A lot of places will have like an interview training or something like that, but there continues to be no specific rubric. Most places will only go so far as giving like a culture and a technical score. Um, and culture typically means like, would I get along with this person on a daily basis? And technical usually centers around your expertise that you showed during the interview. So what I end up looking for myself, usually I start off by asking something about your background and experience, and there I'm looking to hear you explain to me in words that I actually understand, um, whatever it was that you did. And obviously, I have no context. It's a 2 minute conversation. So what I learned from that is, are you a good communicator of ideas that I'm not familiar with? Um, and can you show technical proficiency about something? Because I'm pretty technically proficient, I think, anyway. There's some subjects I don't know about, but um, you should be able to teach me actually a little bit. Because if I want to work with you, you should be able to teach me. So if things go really well, you might tell me about something I had no idea about before, and I might have just learned something. Um, Usually after that, I'll dive into some sort of actual problem. Um, Typically, what I've been doing for several years is like actual coding problems. That's atypical of most startups and most companies. Most companies do some sort of puzzle or something like that. But typically, I'll dive into some kind of coding problem. Has to fit within an hour or something like that. It'll be something like, write a regex parser using a finite state autonoma or something like that. Um, that sort of thing. Toy problems, something that you can build on, are really typical of those. Um, and what I look for in those is not so much can you solve hard problems necessarily. I actually personally hate those. So I have a real special place in my heart for the like crazy quiz problems that have one right answer and like, then you just get this like blank look from people. Those are bad. I don't really like asking that kind of thing. So what I end up looking for is just good code. So I prefer to ask things that you can answer, or something I can teach you how to answer, rather than making you solve the problem so much. And then seeing, how do you structure code? Do you think it out before you just dive in and do stuff? When you confuse yourself, which a lot of times if you're in an interview scenario, you confuse yourself um, just because you're in a rush and you're nervous and whatever. Um, what do you do when you do that? Like, do you back away and start doodling on paper and just like take a step back, or do you just dive in and keep, winding the rope around your feet so you trip some more? It's, those are the kinds of things I end up looking for. I look more at like code structure. Like, did you implement good interface? And not necessarily naming because it's like a, toy problem, but a lot of people would probably judge you on like, don't name variables A, B, and C or something like that, right? Just do you show that if I was going to review your code, and most companies have some form of code review once you're actually working there, like would I push yes or would I have a lot of things to say about it? And a lot of that's communication, because it is a contained time and a contained problem. So sometimes I'll just excuse things as long as somebody goes, hey, I wouldn't usually do this, but this is what I would usually do. I'm going to do it this way now, just if I want to save a couple minutes. Like, sweet, you know what's up. I'm good with that. Um, and then obviously I want to also see them solve the problem. Like I said, I don't like to give super hard ones, but that's a thing. So if it's a simple problem and you couldn't solve it, that's bad. So
Yeah.
um, and then at the end, I usually skip to questions of some sort. And at that point, that's really where I'm gauging your interest. And I've had perfectly good interviews sometimes fall flat on me because somebody was like, "Yeah, I don't really have any questions," and they just kind of like can't do that. They're clearly just not in it. Um, which somebody could be really awesome, and then they just don't seem to care at all. And what do you do at that point? Well, do you even want this job? Like, should I recommend you for this job that you can't even perk up for the day, get excited about? Um, and that's where I'm kind of judging that. And that's where what I was talking about earlier really counts. Like, ask me about what the company does, and ask me about what I do here. Ask me how I like it here. Make me say something bad about the company. That's a great thing to do to interviewers. Actually, like make them say
Nice.
something bad about the company because you will learn something. Um, but I like that, right? It shows that you've thought about it, that you're learning from your experiences, and that maybe you're trying to dodge something that happened to you in the past, right?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, that's the typical flow of interviews for me.
Mm.
Now that middle part can get swapped out for different kinds of questions. They're not always coding based. Eric, do you want me to dive into those maybe?
Just let me take another little tangent, and then we can dive into that. Just to complete the circle. So what do you actually do? What do you do when the candidate leaves the room or the phone goes dead? Like what is that last little bit of your flow?
Sure, yeah. Sometimes I've taken good notes. Sometimes I'm having an off day and I haven't taken very good notes. And sometimes I'm just lazy or whatever. Sometimes I have a meeting immediately after and I get dragged to it right away. This is roulette. It really is. So what happens next, what I'm supposed to do next is write down a score, like a numeric score, um, on, arbitrary scale 1 through 10. And hire this person or I'll quit, 1, don't hire this person, or I'll quit. um, um, and usually some subjective feedback of some sort. And then if there was some sort of material produced by the interview, like code, um, that would go in there too.
Mhm.
That's the like whiteboard interviews, like you don't bother taking pictures of that kind of thing or anything like that. Well, I guess I've never been in a room. Maybe somebody does that, but I've never seen anybody do that or heard of anybody that does that. Um, so yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. Like I said, in practice, what happens is sometimes you've just got something going on right away, which means that feedback could get written anytime between immediately and tomorrow, or sometimes even never. In which case, you get nagged by recruiters. Hey, you should have written the feedback. Um, yeah, so it's not always immediate.
And it is roulette.
It is a roulette, yeah. Different places will have like different kind of cultures around it too. So some places will discourage you very heavily from talking to other interviewers to keep your, opinion very unbiased. Other places don't care. Whatever the case may be, other places encourage you to talk to their interviewers. So it can also depend on that, right? You talk to another interviewer and what do you think, and the person's like, rocked, and it immediately influences your opinion, right? Even if they
Yeah.
completely bombed your interview, you go, well, my coworker thinks they did great, so I'll bump their score up a little bit. Maybe it was just a fluke. And the same thing happens if somebody says, hey, they were terrible, right? Immediately your good score, you're like, you start hedging a little bit. You go, well, I don't know, maybe it was an easy question, or maybe I, gave away a lot, or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
So it's roulette.
Got it. And so actually before the interview itself, I mean obviously you sit at a point in the funnel that is not the entire funnel, and so people are sort of handed to you, like you said, they kind of get dropped into your calendar, and you probably, I mean, I don't, do you even get a chance to read the resume beforehand?
So actually, um, it's a pretty even split of people I've spoken with. Some will read resumes and will actually insist on it. Some people get really, really nitpicky. They want to see all the right words and will like criticize typos and whatever. Personally, I'm in the camp of don't read the resume until after the interview, um, which gets interesting because that means that my knowledge of that person and their experience and the depth of their experience is only what they told me. And then I go reconcile that with whatever was on their resume afterwards. And the results are interesting to me sometimes. Sometimes somebody with like lots of experience may not have actually performed very well in my interview. And sometimes somebody with almost no experience could perform very, very well. So um, that's to say resumes aren't actually a good signal. Like
Yeah.
whether most people realize it or not, they're not actually a great signal. So me personally, I look at the resume afterwards and see how it matches up with what I saw. And it does, it does affect my decision a little bit. Clearly, if somebody says they've been doing Ruby for 5 years or something, and I conducted an interview in Ruby and they didn't seem to have really deep knowledge of it, that definitely counts against. Um, and vice versa, things can count for you too, right? Maybe they were in management for the last several years, in which case, you probably weren't so great at coding at that time. So that's fine. It goes both ways. But yeah, some people read the resumes up front. Um, if it's a experience-based interview, so I also do like verbal interviews sometimes. They're not always code-based. Then obviously I have to read the resume up front so that I know what experience to ask about. Um, yeah.
So that's interesting. I guess, and one of the reasons I was actually asking about that too is if you had any insight in terms of how someone can get to you in that first place. I mean, like, clearly, like a lot of people have been filtered out by the time that you see that resume. But I mean, do you have a sense for the kinds of candidates that do make it through, and the criteria that allows them to get through that screen of despair?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, again, just realize that the screen is like, it's not quite set to random, but kind of. It definitely helps, like, if you just get referred somewhere, because a lot of times you can kind of skip that resume screen, or at least get your resume bumped to the top. As much as we want to be like a merit-based, you know, uh, tech sector or whatever, and we want to be a place where that's the case. Like that, it's just not how people work. Somebody who recommends someone obviously gets bumped to the top at like vast majority of companies. Somebody who has an advocate in the company is even better, depending on the company, right? So you can get referred where somebody just like drops your resume in the stack, but if they go and bug people, go, hey, have you looked at such and such's resume yet? It gets looked at. If not, just called in, depending on who they are with it. So um, yeah. Now that said, resumes, like if you do end up in the stack, um, I've done a lot of job fairs and things like that where I'm asked to make split-second decisions about resumes. I don't enjoy it, to be honest. I know it's a little untrue. It's not really reality. But yeah, what typically you want to do is just pattern match, right? I mean, it's the same thing I was saying about like mission statements, and stuff like that. Recruiters are not technical people. Typically, I've met a couple recruiters that used to be engineers, but the fact is most engineers are still engineers. um, and so most recruiters don't have a super technical background. So their knowledge is, does this word match up with the word I'm looking for? Um, I'm looking for somebody with X. Does the resume say they have X? Um, that's unfortunately the case. So uh, yeah. Hack resumes will typically have like a long thing at the bottom of like technologies I'm familiar with or something like that. It's like obligatory because people just put it on there thinking, well, the technology I'm interested in will match. Um, that said, I would recommend that if you apply at a company you actually really care about and you don't have an in, and you've done relevant work of some sort, like you should look into what kind of technology they use there, for example, besides just their mission statement or whatever. But like look at their open source contributions, try and read some of their blog posts, figure out, do they use like Node or something, or do they use Rails or something like that? And if you have any experience like that, maybe bump it up on your resume just a little bit. Highlight that a little more than the other stuff. So, if you did it once at a job or something like that, like maybe write a bullet point about it just so it's on there.
That's a great strategy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, resumes are kind of they're a really crappy filter, but it's how things work. So
Hmm.
I think a lot of people wish there was a better way to do things.
Right. Well, um, we're stuck with the paradigm for now.
Yep, absolutely.
And given that we are, and given that you now have these groups of people who are coming to you, let's take a look at some of these different interview flavors, and sort of how this tech interview itself actually unfolds.
Yeah. So let's go through the process first. Let's just talk about the common process, and then I'll go into the different kinds of interviews you're likely to see throughout the process. So typically you go through a pipeline of some sort, and a lot of companies see this just like marketing funnel. How many resumes can you get in, and then you select a smaller part of the funnel. Maybe we only take 10% of those, the ones we think are good, arbitrary criteria, like I said. Um, those usually get bumped into some sort of screen process of some sort, which varies a lot from company to company and process to process. Um, some companies have tried to mechanize this a little bit with like online quiz questions or things like that. Um, Hacker Rank or whatever. There's a bunch of them. Some of them will just email you a question and expect you to send some code back. things like that. Others will just skip straight to somebody calls you. Screens are very rarely on site. On site's expensive, um, and companies don't like doing that because now they have to waste several people's time on somebody they have no idea if they want to hire or not. So I wouldn't expect to actually visit a company in that phase yet. Um, Whatever that is goes through, whatever their scoring process is. Um, a lot of places will do multiple screens, especially if you're like a remote candidate, because they, may potentially have to invest 2 grand into flying you across the country next week, putting up in a hotel in San Francisco or wherever. And they want to make sure that they have a couple more opinions before they decide to sink like that much money into somebody they're not sure they're going to hire. So if you're remote, definitely expect more phone calls and things like that before actually having a company pull the trigger. Um, Actually, it can be a good indicator sometimes if a company decides to fly across the country soon, like after only one interaction. That could mean you're doing well, but I wouldn't read into it too much either. But it could mean you're doing well. Um, in any case, this usually leads you to the on-site day of some sort. And tech interviews are brutal. It's a whole day. I have actually never seen anywhere that isn't a whole day. This is universal across all companies. There's no like come in for 2 hours and talk to a couple of people. It is we're going to grill you all day long, including lunch some places, depending on where you're at. There's like books written on this stuff. There's a whole book written about the Microsoft interview process and how to beat it or whatever. Um, I've never read it, but I've heard. Um, and those days are typically composed of several kinds of interviews, which I'll go into just after this. But it's usually a mix of various kinds. Um, you can expect to go home very tired. And at that time, like, you're actually in their office. So, make sure to be respectful. Don't get like drunk at lunch or something like that. Yes, we've had a candidate do that. It's not great when your later feedback in the day says visibly intoxicated. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Um, Same thing. Like, um, there's like all kinds of interview books written about like don't pick a messy lunch or something like that. But like seriously, like don't pick a lunch that's gonna send you to the bathroom an hour later or something like that. Like look for like the mild foods or whatever. Like try and be smart, right? You're already nervous. Don't stress your body out even more. Um, Nobody's going to judge you on that, but like, yeah, you want to be as comfortable as you possibly can be. Same thing, like eat, like don't let your blood sugar dip in the afternoon and like just go crazy. Don't drink too much coffee, obviously. That's a lot of don'ts, but just try and be smart. Try and be the most neutral human being you possibly can that day, because you're going to get grilled all day. So that's just the thing. Usually after that. You probably won't visit the office again. Some places might be a little bit unsure still and call you back the next day or something like that, just while you're still in town or whatever. But I wouldn't expect any more than that. Like you would maybe have like a CTO or somebody like that interview for a final interview. If you progress to a final interview, you're usually doing really well. A lot of startups, it's like a quick like just sanity check from the CEO or somebody like that, somebody completely non-technical who just wants to meet everybody that they might be considering hiring and insists on doing so. It's mostly a check mark. So at that stage, just don't say anything stupid. You know, stick to just being smart and don't say anything controversial, and you'll probably just coast through that part. And then after that comes the whole like offer and negotiation process, or a reject. So at that point, well, you've actually anywhere along the funnel you could have been rejected. Every step has an out to reject it. Um, but at that point, you go into an offer if you got that far. Um,
What's like the approximate level of throughput? I mean, like, is it like a 1 in 10 or like a 1 in 4? Or, I mean, roughly.
depends on the company quite a bit. You can expect the most drop off after the screens because everything is really expensive after that.
Yeah.
So um,
So you mean when they bring you on site, you've done pretty well that far.
yeah, when they bring you on site, remember they're investing lots of money in you now. They're gonna invest an entire day in you. So
Yeah.
that's a significant investment. Uh, so that's definitely a good sign. That said, I've also heard of companies that will take you home halfway through the day if you're like really bomb in the morning or something like that. So some people will cut their losses.
Yep.
um, And what was I going to say? Yes. So on that reject process, companies are notoriously bad at rejections. I've been rejected from dozens of companies, and most of them were just implicit. I never heard back. They stopped writing to me. I sent them emails. I asked. I never heard back. It sucks. Um, don't get insulted. It's really no big deal. I mean, it's not polite, but it's like no big deal either. Unfortunately, it's really commonplace for recruiters to just drop you on the floor and forget about you. Um,
Oh, unless half their team leaves in 6 months and they pick you up again and they say, "Hey, hey, how's it going? Remember us?"
yeah, exactly. In which case you go, hey, you never called back. What's up with that? But in any case, so sometimes rejects can be implicit. Don't hold your breath for a reply. If it's been like a reasonable amount of time, let's say a couple weeks, and you've tried to get in touch, um, be clear. Hey, I'm also interviewing other places, and I need to know what the outcome was. Um, if you still don't hear back, I mean, they've just dropped you on the floor. It's cool, whatever. Um, Impolite, but you know. And if you do get an explicit reject, expect no feedback. And there's a reason for that. Um, Mainly that everybody's lawyers and HR departments are terrified of giving explicit feedback on interviews, just for like lawsuits and things like that. So if they tell you they rejected you for reason X, and you construe reason X to be somehow say discriminatory or whatever, um, all of a sudden they're in trouble, and now they've got to deal with that. So they prefer just to say no. Um, so don't expect a whole lot of feedback on you could have improved by doing such and such. Very, very, very rare. Also, at that point, besides the sort of like legal implications that they're really afraid of, um, typically they're not going to waste any more time on you. It's not really in their best interest to like educate you on how to be a better interviewer at that point. You're just saying no. So anyway, don't be too insulted. Getting rejected sucks, but it is what it is. If you end up in the offer process, I don't have a whole lot of tips on negotiating or anything like that, but I will say this. There's always room to go up a little bit. In fact, nobody's going to ever start their initial offer at the top of whatever pay band they're considering you for. So you can always negotiate. Every offer is negotiable. Every offer is a business transaction between you and a potential employer. So
In
whether
fact,
that's
as far as you guys are concerned, you are required to negotiate. This is non-negotiable.
Yeah, and recruiters will don't. Recruiters are really good at negotiating. They may not be very good at matching words on resumes, but they're really good at negotiating. They'll tell you, well, I went through all this trouble. I went as high as I could possibly go. I put together this awesome offer for you. Say, that's cool, but I need more. Um, so there's always wiggle room. So and remember, once you do start a job, depending on how mature the company is and their HR processes are, it may be difficult to get a raise. So keep that in mind, especially at smaller startups where there isn't like regular review cycles or anything like that. If you didn't negotiate at the beginning, you're going to find yourself asking for a raise that there's no framework for giving you later. So um, you may as well start as high as you can. Bigger companies don't have that issue. They have like regular review cycles and peer feedback and that kind of thing. So less of a concern there. But even there, it's definitely worth negotiating because your pay can only be adjusted based on that anchor that you set. So but they don't really adjust it down. Things are terrible. In which case, leave. um, yeah. So let's go into the kinds of interviews you're likely to encounter during that sort of like on-site day. I told you a bit about the kinds you're likely to see during a screen. Puzzle questions online. Some of them are even automated grading. See how efficient the thing is, how quickly it runs, that kind of thing. Phone screens. The way my current company does them is we actually code in CoderPad, CoderPad.io, and execute code. Fairly uncommon. You're not going to see that a whole lot of places. Most of the time, a phone screen is going to just ask you about your experience and maybe throw a couple crazy questions at you, like what do you do in Linux to like list files in a directory? Like what do you like type in, or like how do you find out if a host is up, or like that kind of thing. It's going to be very, very cursory questions at best. Um, but on-site interviews are much more interesting. There's a lot more different kinds of interviews there. So most common, you're going to see like whiteboard problems and like verbal types of problems. Um, a lot of them will be pseudocode, so like reverse a string or whatever is like super common. There's if you interview a lot of places, you'll pick up on whatever the like uh, kind of hot questions right now are. I know several years back, like most questions could be answered with either a hash table or a B tree. I don't know why, but it was the answer to a lot of them. A lot of them are like looking for you to like find the one unique data structure that's going to work for whatever the problem is, and like diagram your thought process on a whiteboard, that kind of thing. Um, Writing pseudocode on a board is horrible. I hate it. That's why I do real code. But those are going to be hit and miss when people are judging you. Like I said, it could be like reverse a string, and then somebody goes, "Well, you forgot a semicolon." Thinking to yourself, like, it's pseudocode. What are you talking about? Who cares? Um, anyway, your experiences will vary there. Depends on the interviewer. So if you do find yourself writing code on the whiteboard, um, which you will, I would say, try and write somewhat neatly. I know everybody's handwriting is terrible, but try and write so people can actually read it. Um, and just be careful. Like it might even pay off to like do some practice questions ahead of time that are like common ones. Like I said, reverse string is super common. Um, Sort a thing. Like we'll actually make you write a sorting algorithm on a whiteboard, which is cruel and unusual to me, but sure, people do it. It might be worth like actually trying to write those algorithms on paper by hand just to practice like doing it, just so you're like in the hang of like just not typing code. Go find some toy problems and try them out. Um, and and then also get good at like running the pseudocode in your head, which again I hate this process, but whatever, it's very common. So get used to writing like an execution table where you keep track of the values of variables and things like that as you iterate a loop, so you can make sure you don't get flustered when somebody points out that there might be a logic error in this problem that they're way more familiar with than you are, um, and that you can step through it as if you were a debugger. Just practice getting good at that, because it'll help you out a lot when you're forced to write things on a whiteboard. Um, Other ones are simply so another kind of interview is simply like puzzle questions. Here's a real question I was asked at Microsoft one time when I was interviewing there. Um, so you go to a bank and there's like those like number cube things, um, and they have the date on them, just like the day number. They have to represent the numbers 1 through 31. In other words, how do you arrange the numbers on the face of two cubes so that you can represent the numbers 1 through 31? Um, Real question that I was asked. I failed horribly. Uh, I'll give away the answer. Turns out that a 6 can also be a 9. You just put the cube upside down, so you run into that part. If you've been interviewing all day and you've got a horrible head cold, turns out you don't really think of that. You don't pass the interview, which is, I think, a horrible question, but expect some bizarro puzzlers like that in some places. Um, Now, that said, just because the interview is cruel, it doesn't necessarily have any reflection on what the workplace is like. So make sure to ask targeted questions about what it's like going to be like to work there, especially if you can like back channel a little bit and go find out about it, because the interview process isn't going to tell you much. Um, Another kind of interview you're likely to run into is so like I said, code. Um, some companies are starting to pick up, like Square does this extensively. It's just coding interviews, so actually sitting down at a computer with somebody and using an IDE or whatever environment you're comfortable with to code through a problem and run it. I've definitely heard of a couple other places picking that up as well, so we're going to see a little bit more of that one. I think those are actually your best odds in terms of interviews because it's something that you're the most familiar with and that at least made up. It's the tool you're most familiar with as well. So if you can find places that do that for your interviews, I would actually go for them. I think your odds are the best. Um, and also, and this one's a weird one, some places actually do presentations. Um, yeah, I used to work at a company that did presentations, and it was pretty simple. You'd come in and you'd present to the whole engineering team, which was like 10 people or something on a topic of your choosing. They'd tell you the day before that you would have to have a presentation ready, make some slides or something. And what they were judging for was like, a lot of the things I was talking about earlier. Can this person explain themselves? Can they demonstrate some sort of expertise in something and explain something to us that we don't know about? And also, are they, passionate enough about, I don't care what subject, but something to, show us that they're interested in this field. And Yeah, that's pretty much the main kinds you're likely to run across. Some other like whiteboardy interview types of things you might run across are like draw a system that you have worked on. So, if you had something specific on your resume, I'd ask you how it worked, and you wanted to hear an explanation, in which case they're looking to see if you can explain your work, which is a big part of working together, so it makes sense. Um, and Other ones might be like design a hypothetical system, so not code, but like draw the obligatory internet cloud and like draw a database and like maybe sketch out what some tables might look like and which ones you'd index and that kind of thing. Talk to this API over here and that sort of thing. And again, that's just a high-level version of seeing what it's like to work with you. So inevitably, if you're working somewhere, you're going to end up sketching something out and explaining to your coworkers before you do it. They want to see what it's like to do that with you and whether you can explain yourself coherently and so on. So yeah, that's the most of the kinds I've seen out there. I haven't run across any other super odd ones so far. It's been most of them. So.
Okay. Um, so I think one of the key questions for this particular audience is, as someone who doesn't come in with a CS degree on their resume and what that entails, so more of a non-traditional background, um, what can you do best to succeed in this kind of environment?
Yeah, so I think for starters, one of the things you need to do is go find companies that specifically are capable of hiring people from that background. You may not be a good fit for a super small startup because they may not know they don't want to. They may not have the bandwidth to teach you. They may not have the bandwidth to mentor you. And so make sure that wherever you're applying, that they're ready for your background in your judgment, not necessarily theirs. Because that's going to help you throughout the interview process to set expectations and so on. But it's also going to help once you actually work there a lot. Um, if you went to the wrong place and they thought it would be a good idea, you're just you could just end up kind of drowning there. Nobody helps you, and you can't get a good footing, and that's not going to be a great first taste of this industry, obviously. So I would say be selective about the companies you apply to begin with. That's just number one. Intuitively, I think medium to large companies are going to be better because they have bandwidth to be teachers and mentors. But that's an opinion. So, um, in terms of like once you're in the interview, like selling your like non-traditional kind of boot campy background, like um, yeah, a lot of these questions are kind of CSy ones, right? It's probably worth your time to go learn about some basic data structures and things like that. You don't need to like know everything cold, but like you certainly should know what a linked list is and what a hash table is, and, like what a binary tree is, and things like that. Like know some basics because I think it's unavoidable. People love computer science questions, just like everywhere. And so you may as well just go learn about it a little bit. Go learn a little bit about big O notation. Nobody's gonna like make you. Well, some people might try and make you work out exactly what the like run complexity of something is, but that's just gonna happen. But mostly what people are looking for is that like things in a tree or like log n something or other, probably, right? Like they just want to see that you know that one thing is slower than the other and that this approach is better objectively than the other one for that reason. So I would suggest that you kind of go through the most common data structures and things like that and just learn about them. So give yourself a sort of pseudo CS background. Um, Maybe go implement a couple of them in your free time just to see what it's like. Just make sure you kind of understand them. Um, and any um, any experience whatsoever is experience. So go pick some open source projects you're interested in contributing to. Go do that kind of thing. It shows initiative. It shows that you didn't just uh, do a program to like just for the sake of like making money or something like that. You want to show genuine interest. People like genuine interest. Um, so that's a big deal. Like if you started, contributing to an open source project is probably the best. Um, but even like little hobby things, like you don't necessarily have to have it open source, but like nerd out a little bit about that thing you built at home to automate your whatever. It says a lot about you and your interest in doing it. And it also shows that you have initiative and a little bit of talent too. Because yeah, you don't have you don't have any experience to sell going in necessarily. So um, definitely oversell those bits. And yeah, I think like I was saying earlier, if you apply to companies that are like ready for that kind of background, they may not ask you as many computer science questions either. They may ask you more practical ones, which is good. Um, so that'll help as well. But yeah, it's definitely sell any side projects, even the little ones that you didn't finish. Just say you did, or say you didn't. It doesn't matter. The fact that you tried, the fact that you tinkered, it's worth a lot. Um, and yeah,
Cool. So I'd like to open it up for questions in just a sec. So just so everyone who's here knows, like, you guys can unmute anytime, ask questions. For anyone who's outside of here, there's that. If you look on the left bar, there's this Q&A button, and that opens up a little Q&A app. And then basically anyone in the Hangout can see the Q&A app, and we can see the questions. The last question I wanted to ask you though was I guess if you can kind of imagine like what a great candidate who doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience thus far looks like maybe someone you've actually interviewed, and you can kind of think about how they approach problems, like what is the prototype of that human being, like what is the model of that human.
I mean that's a tough question actually. um, I I want to see a systematic problem solver who's genuinely interested in taking this on as a career path. I think that's what I want to see. um, think think like an engineer and be interested. I think that's far and beyond the most important things. And also show a propensity for learning. Like you know, um, if somebody teaches you something during an interview, say so. I mean, hey, I just learned that, or show them. Even better, right? I'd say those are the most important things. Show that you're not just willing to learn, but a good learner, and show that you're interested. So yeah.
Awesome. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, I have a few actually. How's it going? My name is Nick Montanaro. I'm a student at RIT. I'm currently working at um, Intel in Santa Clara, doing a co-op for a year. But I'm looking at, being out here, I'm looking at potential full-time positions and even just sort of poking, prodding around, talking to companies, seeing sort of what reaction I can get. Um, so I had a couple questions regarding on-site interviews,
Sure.
and reason being is I sort of suddenly got notice that I'm going to be doing one next Monday, and this was after meeting pretty informally with a guy from the company through a mutual connection. Um, so my background is I go to school for CS, but I mean, we did data structures semester one, year one. So I'm not immediately, I can't rattle off everything at the top of my head. So I guess really last minute, within the next less than a week, I guess, what are some things you would recommend I go over and sort of am really solid on in terms of CS fundamentals?
Yeah, so actually, one of the things I did a lot of when I was interviewing really heavily was just actually went back to my notes from those classes.
Yeah.
And so the things that are worth knowing are just what are the most common sorts of data structures. So let's start with data structures and let's start with typical interview questions. So um, data structures, just know the basic ones. I would recommend maybe focusing on hash tables and trees. I don't know why people seem to like them. Um, and specifically know what their like vague complexities are. Like know in your head that like I should associate this with like I said like a log or something like that, or like this one is like linear-ish. Um, know the kind of ish, and then know what they're good for. So like go find out what they're actually used for, because a lot of times they're going to be the answer to some question, and rather than knowing the data structure down cold, it's better to know when it's useful and what situations it's useful in. And then the second part, for like little like whiteboard codey kinds of questions that you're likely to encounter, just literally go look up common ones and just try them out on paper and just review a bunch of them just so you get good at writing code on paper and solving like little 10-liner types of things. Um, that's going to be your like best bang for your buck. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Um, and anyone else have some questions? And again, if you're viewing, you're welcome to use the Q&A app, and we'll see the question.
I had a question. How common are so I did an interview yesterday with a pretty small firm, and they had seen I was forwarded by a recruiting agency, and they had seen my resume, but they didn't. There was like no real technical questions or anything like that. Is that a red flag, or is that pretty common? Like, I was kind of surprised because I don't really know what they have to base their decision on, and I wasn't sure how common that was.
So that actually depends. Was it a whole day interview or was it just like a quick meet and greet kind of thing?
It was like an hour, like a quick meet and greet. But from the sounds of it, it's what they're going to base their decision on. So
Oh wow, okay. Um, and it was with a technical person?
yeah, it was with the VP of operations and then their lead programmer. It's a really small company, but I was still kind of surprised that they didn't really pry at all.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point. So I meant to actually mention this earlier, but something you don't know at all is about the competence of the people interviewing you. Because nobody tells you this is the first interview I've ever done. That's just not something they're ever going to tell you. And they're not going to tell you that they just graduated college last week and they just started doing this, um, or whatever. Probably not the case here, but in general, remember that you have no idea what the experience level of the interviewer is. Um, and sometimes they can just be bad at it. And you kind of have to recognize it when you see it, and there's not much you can do about it. You try and pick out what might be important to them and whatever, but it's actually pretty difficult to predict because they haven't really formed a good idea of what they're looking for yet either. And so just keep that in mind as you interview kind of everywhere. In this case, it sounds like you talked to somebody who probably has experience and stuff like that. It's possible they're thinking of you for like maybe a non-technical role and you didn't realize it. That's kind of a danger zone. Like definitely double check what exactly you were interviewing for. Was it like a sales engineer position where you're like going to be describing API docs to somebody all the time, or is it one where you're going to be coding every day? Just so double check that your assumptions are the same. Is it for like a kind of a trial like internship or something like that? Because it could be that at a small company they just kind of like wing it and we'll figure out if it works or not if they're going to contract for a bit. Um, that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Heard something somewhere.
Yeah, I think something cut
So
out maybe.
yeah, I have another question. So I actually had another interview today, and it was the second interview. It was on site, and I did really well in the coding interview. They brought me in. They knew my background and everything, so they knew that I didn't have a computer science background, and the interview was going really well. And then they threw this sort of question that I had never even really come across before. It was definitely targeted at someone with a computer science background, and I just didn't know it at all. Is something like that like an absolute sort of like deal breaker, or since the actual coding interview, this was about like a data model, specifically like sparse tables or sparse matrices is what they were looking for. Is that something that will sort of immediately turn a potential employer away, or can the other stuff sort of make up for that?
This is where it turns into interview roulette actually. So that depends on how influential within the organization that person was. It could have just been somebody incredibly junior that just asked the same question and it has a very high standard and gave you a very low score and then it will be ignored unceremoniously. Or could be somebody important there who is a manager or something that people tend to listen to, who's also, for whatever reason, really picky. It could be that they fully understood the context of the interview, but I don't know why they would have bothered asking you a question that they didn't could answer if that was the case. So very much roulette on that one. That said, like good candidates, like typically will bomb one interview. Like inevitably, they just like won't jive with one interviewer, and it's totally common to have like really high scores across the board, -1. Um, a lot of like I haven't seen a whole lot of people really blink. Like they'll do a quick reality check with whoever interviewed you and gave you the super low score. But if everybody else is like, wow, they're great, and one person disagreed, usually there's a conversation that happens and it usually kind of gets ignored. Completely normal. And yeah, I mean, if there's like more than one that didn't go so well, then then I actually turn into a bait. But if it's just one, I wouldn't sweat it at all. Um, and in terms of like how to handle questions like that are like basically completely unfair to you, I mean, yeah, it's hard, but don't try and BS your way through it. I mean, if it's like something very, very domain specific, like sparse matrices and things like that, like just say, hey, I just did this boot camp thing and I learned, I don't know, Ruby on Rails or whatever, but I didn't do any like matrix math or anything like that. I didn't learn about these things. So do you have another question that's maybe more relevant to my background, or can you help me work through it? I'd love to learn about this. Um, those are going to be your best bets instead of like trying to BS your way through it, because then they're not sure if you knew or not and how well you knew it. But if you can just say, oh, just I don't know this. That's a very specific question, and I don't know this. Then or you can also turn it into, please challenge me. Can you explain enough of it? I don't know anything about this, but um, can you give me enough information about it? Can you teach me enough uh, about it in the context for this problem for me to actually have a problem I can solve? Um, is another good approach.
I love that approach.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually going to ask next sort of how you should respond in that situation. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, but if you can get them to teach you enough about it for you to have a solvable problem, that's probably your best out.
Yeah. Yep. I think we have time for one more, maybe. Is there one question lurking out there among the viewers or the rest? Going once.
I have another one.
Oh,
Ideally, someone else who hasn't asked a question can go. But
all right, going
I
once.
had one.
All right.
Okay, so what's
Hold it
good
up.
post-interview etiquette? Like, should you reach out to who interviewed you if you're able to do that, or what would you like to see from someone you interviewed after the fact?
Honestly, from people I interviewed, I kind of expect the recruiter to be the layer of abstraction. I mean, unless you really hit it off with an interviewer, I probably probably wouldn't like reach out specifically, especially to technical roles. In more businessy roles, I've heard that's common, but I've never interviewed for like a more businessy role or anything like that. So I can't really say for those, but for like tech things, like I'd personally be pretty weirded out if I got like thank you emails from every single interview I did. And in fact, like some interviewers might even be reluctant to give you contact info because they're going to be afraid that you're going to try and use them as a contact point instead of the recruiter. They very much like delegating it to the recruiter as much as possible. That said, the recruiter is your contact point, and I would use them as much as possible. So, they might be worth sending a quick thank you note to, maybe the next day or just after you leave or something like that. They'll usually walk you out the door anyway, so it's a great chance to just thank them, and you can follow up the next day and say thank you to the recruiter. Say you had a great day or whatever. If there's anything specific in there, they'll pass it on. If you call out like, I really enjoyed talking to such and such specifically, like they'll totally pass that on. So use them as your contact point, I think, at least in this industry. And besides just like next day, sometimes they do get busy. Like I said, sometimes they just drop you. It's really unfortunate. Give it a day or two before asking what the outcome was or anything like that, or ask what a reasonable time frame is straight up. And if you don't hear back, like in that time frame plus a couple days, like prod them a little bit. You definitely don't want to go like nuclear on them and call them 6 times at midnight or something like that, wanting to know where your offer letter is. Don't do that. But it's okay to ping somebody if you haven't heard back after whatever time frame they gave you. Maybe even a couple times a day of space or something like that. I'd say that's about the general etiquette I've seen.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I would probably say also that, I mean, you're working in a larger company context. I know some of you are applying to much smaller companies where there may not actually be that abstraction layer between the recruiter and the people who you're interacting with, and so I think that's where it gets a little bit more like a judgment call. Some, if it's
Yeah,
if,
it
if it's
certainly gets a little blurry there. I would lean for the whoever your point of contact appeared to be, like whoever seems to be running the process for you. Use them as your contact point. And even at smaller companies, a lot of times it'll be somebody that they're contracting out to, like a recruiting firm or something like that, or they're called headhunters too. But a lot of times they'll be your point of contact, and just remember they're not employees of that company. But
actually they work for that company.
yeah, they work. Their company works for that company, which is
Yeah.
kind of weird, but they may still be your point of contact sometimes. So is what it is. I'd lean for keeping one point of contact, and if you can't figure out who else it is, like whoever seemed to be running things for you, whoever gave you the schedule and invited you to their office that day, maybe choose that person. Um, yeah, or ask who to follow up with if it's unclear.
Awesome. Well, hey, Simo, thank you so much. This is awesome. I
Yeah,
hope it was valuable for all you guys. I know it was valuable for me.
yeah, definitely a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, everyone who made it here, and everyone who's watching at home. Simo, maybe I'll grab I'll see if you're all right sharing contact info or anything offline, so you're not, you're not putting it out on the web unnecessarily. And yeah, otherwise, just thank you so much, and have a great night.
Cool. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.